Okay. Okay, so aside from this Samuel here, and any other people who are called Samuel in the audience, what does it mean? What does Samuel mean? Go on then. Sorry? Yeah, kind of heard of God. Kind of the other way around, yeah. Partly because, or he was called that because Hannah said that I called out to God and he heard me. And so Samuel meant heard of God. And we forget these days because our names are just sounds that we say to identify a person. But in those days, the names had a lot of significance in being named something because it represented or it was to remember a particular event. It was also, oh yes, that's right, I should say, it's also, if you read through the first few chapters, it's a very big play on ideas of seeing and hearing. We have Samuel being heard of God. And when he was in the temple as a young boy, God was calling him. He heard it, but his trainer, if you like, his mentor, called Eli, didn't. We'll see again that Eli is getting older and more blind by the day. And there was later in Samuel where he says, where the Ark of the Covenant had been stolen and he was all nervous waiting for it to come back. He was blind, but he was sitting watching for it. What did that mean? Prophets in those days were called seers, people who could see maybe into the future, see what God was doing, but Eli was blind. And eventually God kind of pushed him out of the way, not because he was physically blind, but because inside he had let go of God and was stopped looking. So if you read through Samuel, there's this play on ideas of hearing and seeing and not hearing and not seeing and being blind and God hearing, and it's very interesting when you do that. Okay, next. Samuel was an only child. True? Okay, a few false. A few more. About 50-50. False, he had 2 brothers and 3 sisters or something like that, but that came along later on. Samuel, the next one, Samuel was a good guy. Okay, by that I mean that there's no biblical record of major shortcomings. He didn't cheat on his taxes. He didn't, no hit and run accidents, stuff like that. He was a good guy. True or false? True, hands up. Not sure. Okay, false, hands up. Okay, more false. Probably false. It talks about his sons, who he appointed to take over him. And they were, shall we say, not of the same caliber as he was. And in fact, they were just leading people in the wrong way. So to the extent that he was responsible for his son's behavior, yes, there is some record of shortcomings. Samuel never went to law school. No lawyers here to say anyway. Samuel never went to law school. True or false? Oh, people are getting more and more frightened by them. True? False? True. He never actually did go to law school. He was called a judge, not because it was the modern judge that we know of today. Okay, 2 more. Samuel was a Methodist preacher. True? False? Mostly false. Well, kind of true. In chapter 7, verse 16, he did a circuit judging Israel, just like Methodists. Okay, never mind. Finally, where did this one is extra points if you get this. Where did Samuel retire? And it's not a trick question. Where did he retire? Not the Bahamas, not. No? Okay, he retired in Ramah, his hometown. That's where his parents came from. And so he just went back home to where he was from. Knew everyone. That's where he left. That's where he stayed. Okay, it's a bit of trivia. What do we do with it? And sometimes we can concentrate on the trivia, and we're trying to draw out lesson from it, which is good, and which we should do more and more. But when we concentrate on the details of the passage, the kind of microscope method, sometimes we miss a few things. Now, in the case of Samuel, in the case of a lot of Old Testament accounts, which stretch for chapters and chapters, and this is happening, that's happening, and it's a whole multiple seasons of soap operas almost. It's sometimes more useful to take the helicopter view and kind of zoom out and see what God was doing. So we look at the small bits of accounts that we know of, zoom out and say, what's happening here? What's actually going on when we look across the whole thing? And so I want to maybe just summarize Samuel as a plot line, just to get us in the right direction. So the incumbent priest in those days, his name was Eli. His family and his lineage was fading. He wasn't taking control of his sons. His sons were sleeping around with the women. They were stealing money. They were forcing people to give up their offerings in the most improper way. And God said, that's enough. I've had enough. You guys are out. All the promises, by the way, to you guys, canceled, annulled. Don't come to me crying anymore. Not after all these years of insulting my name. And we see Samuel slowly being brought up to replace him in a way. Samuel saved Israel from a Philistine invasion and the control of those days. He reluctantly let them have a king. At the end of it, they said, we want a king, we want a king. So he says, they're going to tax you, they're going to take your sons and conscript them into the army, you're going to take your daughters and make them cooks and perfume. Gender stereotyping, but it's the culture of those days. And they said, no, we still want a king. And so he anointed for them, he chose for them Saul, and later on, David. So that's kind of Samuel's life in a nutshell. The context of those days was that in Judges, it was a time of great moral and political turmoil. Everything was being just changed all over the place. It was in between coming out of Egypt. The people of Israel were coming out of Egypt as some kind of extended clan group. And they were moving to the structured society with royalty, with lineage, and all that kind of stuff. And this was in between. And actually, the moment they came out of Egypt, they just gave up, turned away from God, and couldn't be bothered with him. And it was just through this time, it was almost cyclical that God was calling them back. They turn away, he'd have to call them back, turn away. And during this time, just before going towards a time of kings, we see Samuel coming out. In the book of Judges, so if you want to see the connection, look through the book of Judges, you have the repeated line saying the people did evil in the sight of the Lord. They were just doing evil continually. After Judges is the book of, come on ladies, book of Ruth. And all of a sudden, we've zoomed in, was it? Okay, there we go. And Samuel and Ruth. Okay, and all of a sudden, we moved out from this geopolitical upheaval. And we've zoomed into, if you like, the camera just zooms into a small family and this foreigner coming in to join the people of Israel. And while all this turmoil and upheaval was going on, we see one family doing good, as it were, being obedient to God, a foreigner joining the God of Israel. And what happens? This foreigner is put into the lineage of King David and eventually of Jesus Christ. Very odd. So you've got all these big things here, and God's camera suddenly zooms in on just one family. Everyday family, farmer, and some foreigner who's come in. What's going on? In Samuel, here we have a seemingly ordinary priest, or ordinary person becoming a priest, and also an ordinary priest, as it were. And he turns out to be the backbone of the nation, of what was going on in those times. He was the anchor of God's stability during the time of turmoil that was going on. And when you look at the life of Saul, I think what is remarkable is that he is quite unremarkable. He's almost a bit player in the story of his own life. If 1 Samuel, so this is the book about him, or named after him. If this was a movie, he'd probably get